All right, welcome to the Young Turks. We have with us David DeGraw. He is the man who started the 99% movement among the people, he would claim. I think he is the guy who started it. Now we're talking to you in the first year anniversary of the beginning of Occupy movement at Zuccotti Park. September 17th, of course, is when it started, and that's today. And I want to talk to you about what's happened in that year and how it all began in the first place. And you've not done an interview in 6 months, so this is big deal, and we really appreciate you coming in to talk to us at the Young Turks.
Well, thank you. I have tremendous respect for the work you've been doing, and that's why I'm kind of breaking my silence with you here today. That's
terrific. So, first of all, for the people who don't know, talk to me about how the 99% movement started and how that eventually led to what happened at Zuccotti Park.
Right. Well, in February of 2010, I co-founded the 99% movement, which was just an online movement. It grew out of my economic reporting. So I was putting out these calls to action for a 99% movement. And it really evolved and took on a whole new shape with the Occupy movement. You know, no one deserves credit for you know, there's no one person that deserves credit for the 99%.
Sure,
or
of course.
Occupy.
Although that's part of their problem, which I'll get back to later. But
right. But part of the reason why I stopped doing interviews, because, you know, in order to create change, you need to put ideas before identity. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I started doing all these interviews, because before September 17th, I had reached out to so many influential people, organizations, trying to get them involved. So then once it started to take off, they all finally returned my calls and emails.
Sure. Ain't that the God's honest truth?
Right.
About how things work.
Right. So then it became, you know, about people wanting to say I founded it, or wanting to say that, you know, giving me much more credit than I truly deserve.
So, but okay, I hear you on all that, and it's nice of you to be humble, yada yada, and it's totally true. A lot of people worked on it, of course, right? So now the thing is, what I'm curious about is how it took off in the first place. How did it go from people not returning your calls to all of a sudden everybody saying, "Oh, I got to return Dave's call"? My God, this thing's taken off.
Right. Well, I mean, I look at the birth of the Occupy movement is in January of 2011 in Egypt with the occupation of Tahrir Square. And then it took off throughout Europe. In May, it was in Madrid, very famously. And then that's when we started trying to focus on the United States. And, you know, anyone paying attention to the protests globally knew that occupation was a clear, excellent tactic to use. I mean, you know, you didn't even need that many people. You occupied public space. All of a sudden, it became the cool thing to do. You know, obviously, you needed a strong message. You needed to have strong political messaging, economic inequality. You know, when we first started doing this a little over 2 years ago, you know, we kept calling it, how do we create a decentralized global rebellion against neoliberal economic domination? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I was reporting on economic issues and I got so sick of the corruption, that's when I started organizing. And, you know, we live in a global economy. And we live in a neoliberal empire, I would call it. And when I say neoliberal, I mean a system that incentivizes short-sighted greed, okay? I mean, it sounds extreme to say it, but we essentially have a neo-feudal system of debt slavery. And that sounds very extreme, I get that, but it is the reality of the situation. When you look at the amount of wealth that has been generated for the past 35, 40 years, wealth and production has just exploded. And I was analyzing the data, and you could look at it and you could say 400 people have as much wealth as 165 million people combined. That's just highly unstable situation. And if you break it down, US millionaire households have $46 trillion in wealth. Okay, I mean, that's just absurd. Only 0.1% of the population even makes $1 million a year. So you have 46 trillion consolidated in the hands of a few, and it's to the point where the average American does not realize how much wealth that is. I mean, 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. I mean, and we're talking 46 trillion, right? Now, and this all ties into, you know, the fact that we live in a Skinner box, essentially. The mainstream media, we can talk about creating the spectrum of thinkable thought, and that we all live in a Skinner box, and it's not some grand conspiracy theory of people controlling the media. It's a system of incentives. It's behaviorism 101, and you certainly have experienced this in your life. You incentivize a certain behavior, a certain way of thinking, and you reward people for thinking a certain way. You reward people for thinking like a Democrat, you reward people for thinking like a Republican. Essentially, you're rewarding people for status quo messaging. It's censorship by omission and bullshit on repetition is what I like to say.
Right.
I mean, anything of importance is not discussed in depth in the mainstream media.
So there's a tremendous amount of truth in what you're saying, and in terms of the instability, people might not realize that the last time we had this level of income inequality was right before the Great Depression.
Right.
So it's not good for anybody, and eventually
Absolutely
that wealth got wiped out even for the rich in a lot of instances. And you talk about the debt that we're under. Well, everybody knows that. They know the debt that they have, and they know that there's some people who are holding the 46 trillion. Now, look, it's not against wealth or wealth creation. It's against
Absolutely
the
not.
wrong incentive structure, which you talk about, I talk about, Dylan Ratigan talks about a lot, et cetera, right? So we're all agreed on that front, but I think a lot of people agree to that. But why did it strike a chord at that particular time? You think it was mainly the Tahrir Square and all that allowed Americans? I mean, we had 1,500 people protesting with families and kids and strollers in Orlando. I keep thinking about that. Right. And it was in Pittsburgh, and it was in all these different places all across the country. Why was the spark lit at that time, you think?
I mean, it was such a confluence of forces. I mean, it reached a tipping point, I mean, it was 3 years of people who were in the middle class who fell out. We had 30% of the middle class fell into poverty over that time period. And, the first time we tried to occupy Zuccotti was in June, shortly after the Madrid occupation. It was on Flag Day.
Oh, that's interesting. I think a lot of people don't know that. Uh-huh.
Right, and because I mean, it was very popular online. The video we put out for it had a couple 100,000 views very quickly, but it fizzled when it came to actually occupying public space, and so. Everyone was saying, oh, you're crazy, people are too propagandized and passive, as you were saying, to actually have a nationwide nonviolent civil disobedience movement. But, it just reached a tipping point, and all you have to do is, I say, we live in a time of mental slavery to a certain extent, and debt slavery, as I was saying. Again, I know it sounds extreme, but it's true. I mean, people are conditioned through the media. They feel very isolated in their financial struggles. And the second why occupation was working throughout the world and why we thought it would work here is because the second you occupy a space and people are talking about the same issues, all of a sudden everyone who felt so isolated by the mainstream media realizes, hey, this is a systemic problem. This is a total systemic problem. Our country has been overrun by corruption. Everyone knows that it's unsustainable, it's unstable. So this is just giving people a space, a frame for them to go and express themselves, express solidarity, express their grievances.
Right. I did a speech at Occupy LA about Bradley Manning, and the theme of it was you're not alone. And you're not alone if you think that what happened to Bradley Manning is outrageous and un-American, right? And the reason I gave it that way is because of exactly what you're talking about, because the media only presents one side of the story, that it is the status quo, the establishment side of the story. It seems like it's two sides of a story because they play Democratic-Republican games,
exactly.
Right? But it's actually
the spectrum of thinkable thought. They restrict the limit of the debate you could have. The debate is never about, the unfettered corporate corruption, the corporate ideology that dominates. The debate's we never sit down to dinner and turn on CNN or MSNBC or Fox and they're debating like, whoa, a very small percentage of the population has $46 trillion. Well, how could we use just a percentage of that $46 trillion to evolve society? Look, the entire national debt is what, 15 trillion, something like that? Mm-hmm. That's a third of the 46 trillion. Now, I'm not saying that we should go and tax those and levy their wealth and stuff, but let's have a debate about how we can use this mind-boggling amount of wealth. to evolve society.
And the reason that they don't have that debate is that immediately people would scream redistribution of income. But wait a minute, in the golden age of this country, between 1945 and about 1980, we had tax rates between 70 to 90% for the top marginal bracket, which means, I mean, if that's not redistribution of wealth, I don't know what it is. But it worked in terms of creating this gigantic middle class, which we then eviscerated after 1980. And I think people get it when you say, hey, the media...
It's short-sighted greed. It's just a system of short-sighted greed.
That's exactly right. And I think right now what's developing is between people who are long-sighted, and they might be greedy too, a lot of human beings are, and short-sighted greed, and you have that battle, and so maybe that's the battle between George Soros and the Koch brothers, right?
Exactly.
And that plays out. And I think when you tell people, hey, listen, the media, they got there by protecting the status quo, people go, oh, right, wait, of course, they benefit and profit tremendously from the establishment. Why would they want to tear it down? And then it clicks on people and go, oh, right, that's why they're protecting the establishment. Now, having said all that,
it's the denial of wealth, not to cut you off, sorry, but it's the denial of wealth. If Americans understood how much wealth was out there, how much wealth was consolidated into the hands of the few, and what could be done with that wealth, the possibilities of what we could do with that wealth, there would be a revolution in the street overnight, right now, tonight. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. That's what changed the whole game for me. Once I understood how much wealth there really was that is being denied to 99% of the population.
Right, and what it could do is create an equality of opportunity that could actually have the entire society grow much bigger and richer together, right? And it's not a matter of taking and just spending it somewhere else. It's a matter of giving an investment opportunity to the rest of the country. So look, obviously we agree on those issues, but somewhere along the line something went wrong. So there was Zuccotti Park, it got shut down. I didn't agree with how Bloomberg shut it down, and I think some people thought, hey, it's okay, it's a great opportunity for us to do other things, but it wasn't. And I'm going to keep it real here. I think it totally fizzled out, okay? Now, what's your take on it? And if you think something went wrong, what do you think went wrong?
Well, the media attention and the larger gatherings absolutely fizzled out. But the amount of organizing activity that's going on now compared to a year ago is absolutely night and day. It has become so diffuse. Look, I've spent the past 3 years of my life essentially cycling between organizing and what I would say is marketing. And by marketing, I mean like a form of combat journalism that is part investigative reporting, part call to action, okay? So you organize something and then you market it, it blows up, becomes very diffuse, then you have to organize it again, market it again, it blows up, and over the past 3 years, it keeps exponentially getting bigger. And right now, Occupy was so huge, I mean, Occupy, I look at Occupy as the people, right? I mean, it's not an organization, it's just humanity, calling out for sanity, for freedom, for dignity. So I don't look at Occupy as an organization. I just look at it as an outlet for people to air their grievances and push a justice narrative. So right now it's incredibly diffuse, and we need to organize that again, and that's going to take a while because it was so big. I mean, literally there's thousands of little groups out there, and to organize those groups, to get them to move together again the way we did through occupation is a monumental task. And it's a task, by the way, that requires funding, okay? I mean, there's been a lot of debate over funding issues, and look, for us to organize and push the movement, we need funding. I spend a lot of time talking to all these 1%ers who say, that they want to help, they understand that things are unstable, unsustainable, and they want to help. But we do need resources. We need funding.
Of course. Look, it's obvious to some and not so obvious to others that look, you need dedicated staff to be able to organize anything. Otherwise, people volunteering 2 hours a week or 3 hours a month can't do it in an organized enough
fashion. That exactly touches on it. A lot of the most effective organizers that made this movement happen, after a couple of months, they were like, I'm broke. I got to feed my kids. They have to make money and live. And there was no funding coming in to keep them eating and a roof over their head, you know? I mean,
and look, that goes to the difference between the Tea Party and Occupy. And people say, well, Tea Party must be more establishment. It's lasted longer. It's affected politics longer. But the reality is the Tea Party got co-opted, and the guys who co-opted it have a ton of money.
Right.
So they poured in staffers who are going to keep things organized. They have several different think tanks that are working on it every single day with how many different staff members. They have buses that they send around to pick people up, to bring them to pro-corporate rallies, etc. Without that funding, if you're truly anti-establishment as Occupy is, well, then it gets really, really hard. Now, that's fair. That's true. Now, the flip side is, in keeping it real part two here,
right,
I think Occupy made a great number of mistakes, and they continue to make them. Let me lay that out for you and then see what you think of it. First of all, this whole we get to hear from everybody for 45 minutes at a time is insanity. It's not that I don't want to hear from people. I do. Like, we have a morning meeting where all of our producers talk about what's going to go in the show. But it has to have time limits, otherwise the morning meeting is going to last till the evening and we're not going to actually do a show. So it seems that's... Let's start with that. It seems that participatory democracy swallowed up the rest of the movement.
I do agree with that to a certain extent. Certainly, I mean, look, this is all my view, one person's view. What you're saying has a lot of merit, but again, I look at Occupy as the people expressing themselves. Mm-hmm. I don't look at it as much more than that. Mm-hmm. And when you try to look at it as an NGO or an organization, mm-hmm, to me, that's not what Occupy is. Occupy is about people.
But in order to be effective, don't you have to be a quote-unquote organization to some degree, be
yes,
organized enough to push your message
out? You have, out of the remnants of all the occupations, you have all these affinity groups and new organizations and pre-existing organizations that are coming up and evolving and adapting. I think, you know, over the course of the next 6 months, you'll start to see various groups that grew out of Occupy be more organized and effective, and you will see it.
I'm very skeptical, I'll be honest with you, okay?
Well,
I love the movement. I went down to Zuccotti Park for a week. We started a wolf pack there, etc.
Right, I remember.
But I remember me and my, you know, Jesus was there, and our longtime producers, and we're watching this going, they just took an hour and a half to order pizza. They're never going to get things done this way.
But you're looking for them to do something. Occupy is not that.
Well, I am looking, but
it's you. You know,
no. But David, here's a huge problem, right? You know who I think Occupy is, and what I think they lost track of, and this is problem number 3, is actually those families that showed up in Orlando. That's Occupy. The guys who said, hey, you know what? I get it, man. We're getting screwed and we don't have equality of opportunity here. We're not looking for equality of results. Just opportunity so that my kid in the stroller could have a fair shot, right? And I think that the guys in Zuccotti Park let them down by being self-indulgent and doing the, participatory democracy. What does Bob and Sally think? Instead of actually getting something done, and let alone, you know, all the different things that they came up with on their own. You know, the guy in Orlando doesn't understand this and all the different signs and the whatever other sign. Come on, let's go. We got to represent the guys in Orlando. And I think Zuccotti people thought, I don't care about them. I care about me, and I'm going to represent me and Bob next to me.
Well, certainly there were some people like that. I mean, but again, you know, occupies the people. There is not a them. There is no them. I mean, there was all sorts of random groups of people. Some kids totally inexperienced. Some, you know, old left, you know, some Ron Paul supporters. There was never really a them. It was just all these little groups of people. And when they tried to make it a them, it descended into infighting
But that infighting, they're trying to take ego out of it, but I think that they're doing the exact opposite. I think they're putting
truth to that.
Yeah, they're putting ego into it, like, oh, how can you be the spokesperson? Because implicit in that is, I want to be the spokesperson.
Right, exactly.
Right?
That's
but no.
true.
You've got to decide in some reasonable period of time, who are our 3 spokespeople? That guy goes to CNN, that goes to MSNBC, that guy goes to Fox, because otherwise we're not going to get the message out and we wasted our time.
Look, again, part of the reason why I have not done an interview, and I was doing more interviews before Occupy than after, is because of this issue of the spokespeople. You know, you have to have a lot of respect for all the people who put in such hard work and dedicated their lives to making it happen. movement. And for any one person to stand up and speak for such a diverse collection of people is impossible. I mean, I would go out and do interviews, and I had a whole bunch of people who were saying, you need to do more interviews. You need to be a spokesperson.
Yes.
But then I had...
I'm among those.
Right. And then I had other, diehard people who worked hard to make the movement happen saying, hey, wait a second. This is supposed to be leaderless.
Nonsense. Look,
but you have to let... This was about empowering a new generation to be leaders, to be engaged, right?
And how'd that work out?
It's working out.
You think
it's
so?
not as fast.
How?
Not as fast.
Tell me how it's going to work.
Because we have millions of people engaged in creating change that were not engaged in creating change a year ago. Now, is it organized? Is it cohesive? Is it effective in creating change? Not yet, but it's getting there. I look at Occupy globally as the big bang of humanity's next phase of evolution. Okay, it created this wild new ecosystem of mass transformation. Millions of people turned on, let out of the propaganda cage. The first step is you got to open the prison door so people can come flying out and realize that we can change things. Like, you say another world is possible, but now another world is happening. And that will coalesce. It's going to happen, I can tell you that. And it's going to take some funding. It's going to take, a lot of hard work. But a year from now, I'll come back here and we'll see what happens.
Now, David, I love that analogy, and I hope you're right about it. And it's a really smart way of framing it, and hence why you should have people like you, not just you, but people like you being spokespeople for this cause. And I hope that you're right, that we get some groups that coalesce out of that big bang that then push a specific message. The one that I love, of course, is money and politics, about how we got to get it out. I think that's the core of the problem, right?
Right.
And look, and when I represent that either as, host of the Young Turks or as a guy who put together Wolfpack, do I represent 100% the opinions of everybody who's in those organizations? Of course not. Everybody knows that. They're not dumb. They know that. Right. But is it good enough? Yeah, it's good enough, because you need a voice to go out there and say, this is what we're fighting for. Look, I want to get towards that future in 1 second, but one last criticism here of Occupy, and again, I want to get your thoughts on it. It's great to have you in this room to have this discussion. So I'm going to charge them, and this is very ironic because the rest of the media sees me as like maybe the most progressive guy in media, right? But I think they're too liberal. Okay, and so here's what I mean by that. First of all, right now, reporter Saki Nafo went and did some reporting for Huffington Post on what's going on lately with Occupy, et cetera. Now, you can take issue with some of his reporting, but overall, you got to, I think, what's happening there. And they're, instead of referring to somebody as he, like David, they say he or she. Oh, come on, dude. I mean, you're not a he or a she. You're a he. Right? And, okay, that's just the reality, right? And there's guys, now they didn't do it, but there's guys who are throwing out ideas of giant puppets. Should we build giant puppets? And the reason, it's not that I don't love them for being liberals or progressive, it's that we got to be more inclusive. That, again, I keep thinking about the guys who showed up at those, whether it's Pittsburgh or Orlando, wherever it might be. If you tell them, oh, your baby's a he or she, they're going to say, what the hell are you talking about, and leave.
Right.
So is that a fair criticism, and how do we get more people across the political spectrum involved?
Well, let me say this, the 99% before Occupy, we had so many libertarians and conservatives that were involved. And, back to your issue of getting money out of politics, we went out and we said to all these different groups across the political spectrum, what is our common ground? What can we unite around? And the two biggest issues were getting money out of politics and breaking up the banks. Okay, and the early days of Zuccotti, you had a lot of libertarians and conservatives out there that came and supported and took part. So, as time went by, it became, more of the hardcore, I don't even want to say anarchist. I hate when people say communism, socialism, anti-capitalism. I hate all the isms, okay? I save the isms for the academics and the propagandists, okay? Because all these words are divide and conquer labels. They're all shortcuts to dismissal. And to me, it comes down to human nature. The iron law of oligarchy, right? You start out with a system that has noble intentions, capitalism, socialism, communism. As time goes by, it devolves into oligarchy. People get complacent, power and wealth concentrates. So, we were left with a bunch of people who essentially, were anti-capitalism, that were the ones that were still present and doing a lot of the hard work. And that's all well and good, but, the anti-capitalism message, or calling someone a socialist or a communist, it totally dilutes the game, in my perspective. I mean, it's total divide and conquer.
So I want to just build on one quick thing you said. People get how communism devolved into oligarchy, whether it's Stalin or Castro, etc. They see that, right? And they might think like, well, that didn't happen with capitalism, but you're wrong, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Now, I actually am pro-capitalism, and I had debates at Zuccotti Park about pro and anti-capitalism. And capitalism isn't, let's go capture the government and have, the government give us $4 billion a year in subsidies when we're the most profitable companies in the world. That's what the oil companies get. It isn't the banks going and say, hey, we should get the government to give us $7.7 trillion of free, no interest loans through the Federal Reserve. That's oligarchy. That's not capitalism. That's anti-capitalism. So what's ironic is that the Paul Ryan kind of Republicans who talk a big game, but in reality are crony capitalists, totally agree with some of the far left anti-capitalists in that they both don't really like capitalism. They don't like the free market. They want to pick winners and losers. The right wing does, and the left wing thinks, well, I don't want that market to exist in the first place, right? So
I mean, we have oligarchy posing as capitalism. I mean, it's just total corrupt crony capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's go towards solutions. So what do you do going forward to try to get those, those ideas that you've been talking about here to actually succeed, break through the media, and to get collective power behind it here in the U.S.?
Well, I think it is coalescing around getting money out of politics. I think you look at all the various issues that Occupy rightfully brings up. The connecting, it's like, I say it's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Well, it's 2 degrees of money in politics. I mean, pick an issue that you're passionate about, you're concerned about, that affects you, and then understand how the corrupting influence of money in politics created that issue. How the government subsidizes the problems, but they don't subsidize the solutions. So to me, it all comes down to getting money out of politics, as step one, of course.
Yeah. Look, you know me, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, we started a whole wolf pack to try to do that.
Absolutely.
Because, I had a meeting with other progressives, and I explained to them, look, if you care about the environment, I mean, we got 16 years left before we get to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than when we began, which the entire world, including the U.S. and China, agreed would be a catastrophe, right? 16 years left. And we're never going to get there because we got the short-sighted greed of the oil companies who bought all the politicians in the U.S. And until you get the money out of politics, you're never going to win on the environment. And and you go down the list of issues, you're never going to win, never going to win, never going to win, because there's too much money on the other side. As long as money is the determinative factor and not democracy and not votes, we're not going to win.
Look, I absolutely know the sexy thing is to create the alternative systems, right? But in order for the alternatives to thrive and grow, we have to get money out of politics, because there's a big, corrupt 800-pound gorilla in Washington that will crush all the alternatives we come up with or co-opt them, right? So there's a tension between reformers and radicals within the movement, right? There's the reformers who want to work within the system to change things, and there's the radicals who just say, screw the whole two-party system, right? And I personally am more of a radical. I'm like the two-party oligarchy versus the people. But the tension between reformers and radicals does not have to exist. They work very well together. Radicals open up space so reformers can actually get reform done. And when you get reform done, then that opens up space for true radical change. So, my message to all the radicals and the reformers are, just keep doing what you're doing, because you work excellent together. It's a whole Malcolm X, MLK dynamic. One scares all the elites, and the other, changes the system.
I think the elites and the establishment see the Young Turks as the radicals, but in fact, we're the reformers.
Right.
But hey, listen, everybody fighting towards that one goal of getting our democracy back, to me, is the right way to go. So, David, going forward, where can people find you, and what are you working on in terms of how people can participate?
Well, I've been intensively strategizing the next phase, the next wave, as we've really just touched on. And we're not really ready to unveil what exactly we're doing, but you know, the site that I've been at is ampedstatus.com, A-M-P-E-D status.com. I haven't been updating it much lately, but it's where you can find me. You can join the email list. And so when we're ready to unleash the second phase, we'll let you know through that site. I can tell you that.
All right, David DeGraw, one of the original founders of the 99% movement. Thank you for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Much respect to you.
All right, thank you.